like to start the webinar by welcoming you all to this third SPOC webinar of the year, and this will be the final webinar of this year. Let's talk palm oil, meet the experts. For this webinar today, we have invited Dr. Martin Keim of the University of Groningen. Welcome, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am really excited to have you here, be looking at your extensive research into this topic. Martin is a professor of agricultural economics at the University of Göttingen in Germany. And before this, he had research and teaching positions at the universities of Hohenheim, Bonn, Kiel, and California at Berkeley. His main research areas relate to food security and sustainable agriculture, and he has project experience in various countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So I think we can learn a lot today. This webinar series is hosted by the Sustainable Palm Oil Choice Initiative. This initiative is set up to create sustainable palm oil value chains and to contribute to a more balanced debate about palm oil. The operation is done by Solidaridad, one of the partners of the SPOC initiative. My name is Marieke Leegwater. I started working in the palm oil industry in 2002. And it was the first time when the discussions around palm oil and the rainforest started. And while I started at the industry in 2012, I joined Solidaridad to further work on sustainable palm oil production, but then from an NGO perspective. And at Solidaridad, I was allowed quite some time in the field with both producers and companies. And there I got to learn firsthand that in my perspective, palm oil itself is not a problem, but rather the way it is produced. So this brought me to do this webinar series. Eventually, I'm honored to lead it because I see more and more anti-palm communication, and I think this is not helping us to solve the issues in the palm oil value chain. I hope these webinars will contribute to develop and deepen the understanding about the issues in the industry, but also bring solutions closer. We have about 160 registrations today. So to manage this all, we mute you. Your questions can be typed in the Q&A box, and my colleague Owen will pick them up and give them to me, or I will pick them up myself. If you see me looking frowning, I'm probably doing these two things at the same time. For technical issues, you can contact Owen or Linda, and they are there at support. And this time we'll do a polling question. So the polling question here, this is the signal to Owen. Do you think banning palm oil from the European market would improve the sustainability of food and feed consumption in Europe? So we can all vote now, even I can vote. So I'll do that. And then we'll see the answers in another moment. So
I also see the window, but I cannot press anything. Is that perhaps only because I'm a panelist, or?
Yes, I
Okay.
realized I said it wrong. We can't vote, sorry.
No, I just want to make sure that the rest can. That's okay.
Thanks for checking in. Yeah, so I will start with the first 5 to 7 questions to Martin, and then we'll go to the questions from the audience. So Martin, my first question to you is, you recently published your research about environmental, social, and economic aspects of palm production. Can you tell me a little bit more about what brought you to do this research?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks more generally for inviting me and introducing me here. What brought me to palm oil research? Well, That was about 10, 11 years ago when we were actually with a bunch of colleagues from the University of Göttingen. We all had research experience in Indonesia, but on different topics. We were looking at more forest related topics. Now you can say, of course, all palm is forest related as well. But we were moving to Sumatra, and we were looking for a research question that was of interest to all of us. And all of us meant we were partly forestry people, we were partly ecologists, we were partly climate science researchers, and we were partly social scientists and economists. And so we spent a while there and talking to local people, and it was rapidly becoming obvious that the main thing that was happening there in Sumatra, one of the islands of Indonesia where a lot of the oil palm boom over the last 20, 30 years happened, that this land use change, this massive and rapid land use change observed there was very conspicuous and was opening up a lot of interesting research questions. And we started a large research program there, which is funded by the German Research Foundation, which has now been ongoing for close to 10 years. It always takes a while until you get the proposal written and the money in, but we have been doing research there jointly, interdisciplinarily, together with Indonesian partners. And the main research questions that we address is, first of all, what's driving the land use change from rainforests to more extensively and then more intensively cultivated plantations of oil palm and rubber. Rubber is another important crop there. And what are the effects from a social, from an environmental perspective, from an economic perspective. And then in the end, the research is meant to provide information on how can things be made more sustainable. Because they are not sustainable as we observe them today. And of course, the objective should be to generate knowledge that can help to make it more sustainable. So that was the starting point of our research there.
Thanks. I'm getting a question from support. If you can speak a little bit more closer to the mic so we can hopefully better hear you. Oh, wow, that helps. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I can hold it this way here.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. So these are interesting questions. So how did you eventually decide, well, we choose the palm oil production and value chain?
The research is not primarily on palm oil. The research is on the land use change and land use transformation happening in Sumatra, and this is representative for a lot of the other regions there. But then you're immediately into palm oil because the palm oil area is expanding at the expense of forest and other crops. So that means we're not trying to promote palm oil or only understand palm oil. We are trying to understand what's ongoing there, what are the reasons, and what are the effects from a social and environmental perspective. So that's we're comparing palm oil in the end, of course, with other crops, and we're comparing palm oil with the natural vegetation, which is rainforest, tropical rainforest in these areas there.
I see. So you're actually looking for what's driving land use change, what's driving the developments, and then you're kind of, the palm oil is so present that it brings you there.
Exactly. I mean, in Sumatra, palm oil, which is not native to that region. I mean, palm oil, oil palm as a crop is native in West Africa. And it was brought to Indonesia about 100 years ago. In Sumatra, it wasn't grown substantially before the 1980s. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon. Even in the early 1990s, it wasn't a widespread crop. And now it has become the dominant crop over hundreds of thousands of hectares. So that's what's happening there.
Yeah, thanks. So my second question is, can you tell me a little bit about you and your career? And I think the question is, what brought you to this topic of land use change in Indonesia?
Yes, I'm an agricultural economist by training. So I studied agricultural sciences with a focus on economics of agriculture and food systems. And my primary interest is in terms of poverty and food security. And my research focuses a lot on smallholder farmers because smallholder farming families, especially in Asia and Africa, are the group that suffers the most from poverty and undernutrition. So these are poor and vulnerable groups. And my research is basically looking into what are the reasons for those people being so poor and what can be done in order to improve their livelihoods. And we are doing research starting from effects of new agricultural technologies on the incomes and food security of these farm households. We are looking at different types of agricultural policies. We're looking at globalization trends and how they are changing the marketing opportunities of small-scale farmers in different parts of the world. And so that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from that smallholder perspective. And of course, the land use change that's happening there in Indonesia is a very interesting question because there are local farmers and farming families that are involved to some extent, and we wanted to know what does it mean for them. But we're doing that research in very close interaction with other disciplines, the ecologists and the climate scientists and the forestry people. And that's the innovative aspect, because it's not only taking out one dimension of sustainability, but we are trying to really look at sustainability from that broader perspective of including all the different dimensions. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds valuable. So, can you tell me a little bit more about the findings of your research, in particular the social and environmental and economic aspects you found of palm oil production? And maybe in particular, what surprised you, or was there anything that you thought, wow, I didn't see that coming?
Yep, I'd love to do so. I would like to share my screen because I have, can you see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I have two slides on the main results here. I mean, when we started out the research, we had primarily the information that you get in Europe, namely that there are issues of oil palm expansion into forest areas, and it's leading to deforestation. And our research clearly shows, when we are comparing the environmental indicators on oil palm plantations with rainforest reference sites, then oil palm plantations are doing worse in all the indicators. Whether you look at biodiversity, whether you look at carbon storage, whether you look at water cycles, oil palm is doing worse. That, however, was the expected result. That was not particularly surprising. The more surprising finding was that when we compare oil palm with other crops that are also grown locally, then oil palm is actually not doing so badly in terms of most of the indicators. So if you compare oil palm, for instance, with annual crops, oil palm is a plantation crop. When you compare with annual crops, less input, such as fertilizers, are usually applied, and that's a good thing for the environment. And much more carbon is stored in the plantations, in the biomass that's growing there. You see here that oil palm depends on the age of the plantation, but has on average about 40 tons per hectare of carbon that's stored. Rainforest has much more, no question, but soybean only has about 5 tons per hectare. So in terms of carbon, it's doing better than alternative crops. And an interesting, I need to get the picture here out of my own thing. Sorry. This is a slide or a graph here that compares oil palm with rubber. I told you rubber is the other dominant crop in the areas, and generally rubber is not much under attack. I mean, rubber has been grown there for quite a while. The general notion would be that the rubber plantations are doing better in terms of biodiversity. The graph you look works like follows. Whenever there is rubber, which is the dark green one, which is more to the right or more to the top of oil palm, as we see here for trees, then that means rubber has more abundant and more species richness in terms of trees than oil palm. And that's true for a couple of other species groups as well. For birds, it's true. For this here, Mesostigmata, it's true. But we see that it's not true for all. For bats, the opposite is true. For bats, oil palm is doing better. For understory plants, oil palm is doing better. For butterflies, oil palm is doing better. So in that sense, we learn that oil palm is much worse than rainforest, but it's not worse than other crops that may be grown in the same region. And there was one surprise on the environmental side, which we didn't expect. The other thing that we went out, well, you hear a lot about land conflicts happening between oil palm plantations and big companies and the local population. And indeed, I mean, such land conflicts happen, and they're really bad. But what's often not so present in the public debate is that in Indonesia, rural populations benefit to quite some extent also from the oil palm boom. Around 40% of the palm oil in Indonesia is produced by smallholder farmers with areas of less than 5 hectares. And they grow oil palm, and our detailed data that we collected over several years shows that when they grow oil palm, in comparison to others that don't grow oil palm, they really benefit in terms of higher household income, better nutrition, better supply with food, and particularly nutritious foods. So the farmers that grow oil palm, they really benefit. Other rural households also benefit through the employment opportunities, because oil palm brings new employment opportunities. This graph here shows the typical household income structure of rural households. So rubber and oil palm employment in these crops is important. Also non-agriculture is important. And the growing employment opportunities lead to higher employment incomes. And we see here in this graph on the right-hand side that the villages and communities that grow oil palm, they have much lower poverty than those that don't. And overall, these data up here, they are for Sumatra, so that's one part of Indonesia, but also with other nationally representative data, suggests that oil palm has been responsible for halving poverty rates in Indonesia over the last 20 years. And that's a thing that we did not expect, and that's coming out very clearly from the data. So we do have those environmental issues, clearly, with deforestation, but we do have lots of benefits on the economic and social sides, and these trade-offs need to be managed.
Wow, yeah.
I think I'll come out of the share screening. How do I do that here? So here.
Thank you. That's such an interesting graph. Maybe we do want to take it back. Can you show it a little bit longer?
Yes, I can. Sure. Sorry for getting out quickly. That's the, so here we are.
So if I see it right, we see that in Sumatra, in overall all households, the villages with oil palm have about more than half of the people below the poverty line.
Yes. So here, if you look at all households, then in villages that only grow the more traditional food crops, poverty rate is close to 20%. And in those communities where more oil palm is grown, it's below 10. It's in the magnitude of 8% or so. Yes, so that's only half the poverty rates, and that's largely driven by the additional income that local households get from either growing oil palm themselves as farmers, or the added employment opportunities for those that don't grow oil palm themselves.
So it's a really effective anti-poverty strategy.
It is indeed, and has been in Indonesia one of the main drivers of poverty reduction, not only in Sumatra, also elsewhere. That doesn't mean that there aren't land conflicts here and there. They occur, but behind the land conflicts that are popping up in the media, there's a lot of positive things happening, and that's the serious thing. I mean, we cannot deny that rainforest is cut down, and that this is dramatic from an environmental perspective. But the notion that it's all bad for everybody and from all perspectives, it's not that simple. Many people benefit, and especially the poor. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, it's interesting because in Europe we do seem to get this one-dimensional picture where, let's say, palm oil is really put in a bad, negative spotlight, and there's more and more no palm labeling, and there's a sort of assumption that then a product is better. What is your perspective on the use of palm oil in Europe? How do you think Europe should, let's say, progress with using palm oil or not?
Well, I mean, the ban that has been discussed politically for a while, you know, sounds like popular, because if really palm oil were bad for everything, the environment and social developments, as is often imagined, then of course a ban sounds like a good idea. But you know, when you're asking the question, is a ban really a good policy? Then the answer is no, it isn't. Because when you simply ban, let's say, the import of palm oil, what would happen? We have a relatively large demand for vegetable oil, and instead of palm oil, we would then use oil from soybean, sunflower, rapeseed. So these are the most typical alternative sources of vegetable oil. This figure up here shows the yield differences. 1 hectare of palm oil on average yields about 3.3 tons of vegetable oil. When you compare that to rapeseed, which is grown a lot in Europe, only yields about 0.7 tons. So there's a more than threefold or even more than fourfold difference in terms of yields. And if you were really to replace all the vegetable oil that now comes from palm oil with alternative sources, that would mean we would need much, much larger areas in the end. Much more agricultural area would be required to satisfy the demand for vegetable oil. And land area is scarce. I mean, perhaps you would then see less oil palm production in Indonesia and Malaysia, but the same areas wouldn't necessarily be converted back to forest. They would be used for growing soybean. They'd be used for growing other things. And in the end, probably more forests would be cut because you're replacing a high oil yielding crop with a lower oil yielding crop. So the answer is not banning. The answer is rather, are there options to reduce our demand and consumption for vegetable oil? And I think that you sounded like you wanted to interrupt here.
Yeah.
So please go ahead if you want.
No, please continue, and then I'll interrupt.
I mean, you know, the question may be how can we reduce vegetable oil? And I think if you look at how are we using palm oil in Europe, we see here that's data for 2019. This is the total imports of palm oil into Europe, about 7 million tons per year. And we see that half of this green part here is used as biofuel, biodiesel in particular. And you know, if you ask me, do you consider that a good use? I'd say no, I don't. Honestly, I don't consider using palm oil as biofuel something that's really helping to increase sustainability. So I would think that we need policies that phase out the use of palm oil as biodiesel. And this is a Rabobank projection here, how it could look like. So if we would phase out biofuel use over the next couple of years, imports of palm oil could be reduced by half without any changes necessarily in the food and feed part. And other uses here is primarily cosmetics and a few other things. Of course, we can also think about reducing it in the food and feed part, but not by replacing it with other vegetable oils, but rather by perhaps eating less fatty. One of the things that always holds is let's try to reduce waste and losses because that's you know, when we're wasting 20-30% of all that we buy, then of course that's completely unsustainable. So we need to consume more consciously and reduce waste and reduce biodiesel from palm oil.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that fits very well with our analysis at Solidaridad. That is indeed phase out the use for biofuels, but don't replace the palm oil with other oils because they also have impacts. So rather, let's address the impacts. Do you? Sorry.
The other thing, I mean, that's a very European perspective, and those numbers here are from Europe. We should certainly also acknowledge that Europe uses a lot of palm oil, but is not the growth market that we see these days. I mean, there's a lot of growth and demand elsewhere in the world for palm oil. Because that's the most productive and cheapest source of vegetable oil. And when you look at China, when you look at India, when you look at even you know, African countries that are growing rapidly economically, the demand for palm oil is increasing tremendously. So the fact that we are reducing perhaps palm oil imports and consumption in Europe doesn't mean that globally the demand for vegetable oil will decrease. It will continue to increase. So therefore, the question is not only what to do on the consumption side, the question of course is also how can we ensure that on the production side it is as sustainable as it can be, and there is quite a bit that could be done here.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. In the context of this, what role do you see for corporates in this sector and in these developments?
I mean, obviously, the certification, sustainability certification, such as RSPO here, Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, is one area that has gained a lot of attention. And RSPO, according to their statistics, they are now covering like 20% of the oil palm area that's certified worldwide. And I think that's good, first of all. The second thing, of course, is what does it mean, certified? Is that really fulfilling the criteria that we would expect? Namely, I mean, palm oil production is there, but we hope that it's happening on the area that's already cultivated and not further cutting into the forest. So all the sustainability certification bodies, they try to avert additional deforestation. And when we look at RSPO effects, that's a very recent study here by Santika et al. We see that, well, in Sumatra, the effects are mostly positive. In Kalimantan, they are not so positive. So I think there's really, standards have to be very transparent. They have to be very strict, and they have to be monitored and enforced. And one of the important areas that I see is, how can we make that smallholder inclusive? Growing oil palm by smallholders is socially much, much better than having it produced on large multinational company plantations. But certifying smallholders, thousands and perhaps millions of smallholders, is so much more tricky and costly than certifying large plantations. But I think we need to do that. And we need to ensure that smallholders are not only properly certified, we also need to ensure that their yields are getting better. Because when you compare yield levels of smallholders today, I'm coming out of the graph so that I see you again. So, when you're looking at yield levels of smallholders on average, they're low. The big plantation yields are much higher. And that's bad because, when smallholders cannot increase their yields because they don't have access to training and knowledge and proper inputs and technology, then they cannot raise the yields and they go into the forest in order to increase production. But we need to see that they're able to raise yields in order to reduce that yield gap and therefore reduce their need to go into forests. And the next question is often, okay, but increasing yields is bad for the environment as well if you put too much fertilizer on it or so. Yes, and we need to look for technologies that help to increase yields without necessarily overuse of fertilizers. And here, I mean, training is a good thing. There's organic inputs that can be used. There's breeding that can and needs to be used in order to increase yield. So it's not only pumping more fertilizers onto the plantations, but it's really trying to use good knowledge and innovation to increase yield that helps to not, ever more expand into the rainforest areas. And that's the big challenge that we need to look at.
Yeah, I mean, this is very close to the mission of Solidaridad. Eh? So now maybe I put my other hat off a little bit, but and I know quite some of my colleagues are signed into this webinar, working at Solidaridad, and who are trying to support smallholders actually with their performance and raising yields in an environmentally sustainable way. So yeah, I think we share this mission. I have one question that came in through the LinkedIn announcements already, which really was an interesting one, I thought, and that is from Sebastian Oligny, and he said. And this is the final question before we move to the questions of the audience, because I see them coming in rapidly. If you were, Martin, if you were a farmer on Borneo, based on your existing scientific knowledge, what crops would you grow and why?
If I were a farmer in Borneo, I would probably grow oil palm if I had the capital to do so, because establishing an oil palm plantation is costly. You need capital, and it takes 3-4 years until you can harvest the first fruit. So you need that capital, invest that, and then wait. And that's not so easy for poor smallholders. If you have capital or you get some support, and you're not doing it by cutting rainforest, but you're doing it on the land that you're already having, then it's a good idea to do so. Get proper training, use proper planting materials and inputs so that you get good yields. Because when you compare the profitability of oil palm versus other local crops there, it's higher. And that's the reason why many farmers go for it. But a good thing would be to have not too large plots and use trees as hedgerows. So have, kind of a mosaic landscape, that
Mm.
you don't have you know, huge areas of only palm oil, but you have trees in between, you have bushes, you have perhaps small forest patches that can act as biodiversity bridges for some of the birds and insects. And our research shows that, which is not in Borneo, which is in Sumatra, but the similar things would hold in Borneo. Our research shows that in such mosaic type of landscapes, even when you are growing all palm, a lot of the biodiversity functions and ecosystem functions of forests can be preserved. So away from the pure monoculture with you know, hectares over hectares or square kilometers of seeing nothing else but all palm. No, let's try to have a diverse landscape that combines all palm smaller plantations with trees and other natural landscape elements.
Thanks. I'm going to the questions of the audience now. Let's see how many we can do.
By the way, when you're seeing me like my hand here, that's for the microphone. It's
I see, and it really helps. You're very well audible. The first one I want to ask you, a manufacturer wants to remove sustainable palm oil and replace with sunflower oil. Which do you think is better overall?
I mean, the pure quantity replacement, the answer is clear. It's all palm, because you need less area, much less area to produce 1 ton of vegetable oil through all palm as compared to sunflower. But of course, that doesn't mean that all the oil should come from oil palm. There are various other elements that need to be considered. It's you know, the question of what exactly do you need it for? I mean, different oils have different properties. And they're grown in different parts of the world, and therefore I'm not, you know, suggesting that all palm is the or palm oil is the only vegetable oil we should use, by no means. But I'm just saying that when everyone would just try to substitute, you know, or replace all palm with other vegetable oils, we wouldn't be better off in terms of the environmental conditions. So the short answer is all palm in that case would be better, but the longer answer, as I've already mentioned, is of course it then depends on many factors that also need to be considered.
Thank you. Next one. From Esther Runner, how would you estimate the potential to increase the yield of oil palm on the existing area to meet the future demand and prevent further expansion? Or is further expansion of the area inevitable? And if so, what should we learn from Sumatra?
It's not inevitable, and I think we should really work hard towards not further expanding the land area into forests. I mean, what we see recently is that probably in Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia at least, there isn't much potential for increasing the area without going into rainforest. And that means, well, there we are fairly limited. There are still areas in other parts of the world, including in Africa. We're also doing research in West Africa, where all palm is growing more recently in terms of area. It's not, it's also replacing forest there, but not only, it's also replacing some cocoa plantations and things like this. So I think we shouldn't be concerned about all palm possibly replacing other crops. We should be concerned if all palm is replacing rainforest, and particularly so if it's replacing peat rainforest, because that's particularly important for carbon sequestration and biodiversity. But the question was also, is there potential for increasing yields? And the answer is a clear yes. You saw on one of the slides that the average oil yield is about 3.3 tons per hectare. That's the worldwide average as we observe it today. It's lower than that in the smallholder system. It's higher than that in the large plantation system. But even in the large plantations, where perhaps 5 tons are sometimes achieved, current agronomists are telling us that the potential could easily be at 8 tons of oil per hectare with better planting material, with better management. So there is, from the average that we observe today of less than 4 tons, yields could be doubled. It's not that everyone is able to achieve that, but it just shows you that there is potential. Of course, if everybody were to achieve that, you could double palm oil production without needing more area. And at least moving into that direction, there is potential very clearly. But it obviously needs proper management and proper technology in terms of planting material and so on and so forth.
Thanks. That's very hopeful and promising and inspiring, by the way, that that there's so much potential without further expansion.
But can I mean, I know there are many questions, but I wanted to share one insight that's just showing what's happening, and that the policies in Indonesia are really not very conducive. You're seeing that smallholders who are not able to get a land title, and without the land title, they're not getting access to credit. And without the credit, they're not able to buy good inputs. So we can show that those farmers without land title, they have much lower yields and they go much more into the forest. And the reason for Indonesia not giving a land title is because they say, well, that's on previous forest land. Yes, I mean, when you look at Indonesia, of course, if you're giving titles for deforested land, that's problematic because that may encourage deforestation. But if you give no title for any land that was at some point forested, I mean, most of the land was forested at some point. So I think you have to find a balance between give a land title for those lands that have been deforested for quite a while and protect the rest that's still standing. And that cannot be protected by half-hearted policies as we sometimes observe them. So we need serious policy change there.
Yeah. How is your estimation these days about the Indonesian government and their ambitions to change this? You see a lot of initiatives, the One Map initiative, the moratorium. What is your perspective on these?
I mean, they have big hopes still into certification, and I also think that certification is a good idea. But my concern is a little bit if you just look at how much area is certified, and we're trying to drive it up to 100% without looking at what does it really mean and how transparent and the certification. Of course, there's no use in driving up certification when the standard is not what it should be, right? So if it's only greenwashing. And I'm not saying, I mean, Indonesian policymakers, of course, primarily also see the economic and social benefits. And I think they have to. I mean, they cannot just, completely move out of palm oil. But I think, it's a joint effort, not only blaming Indonesia for cutting forests, because whenever people are blamed, then they don't really like to speak, and they don't accept even constructive criticism no longer. I think we need to have a serious dialogue about acknowledging what are the positive and what are the negative aspects. And I think that we also need to have financial support from the rich world much more flowing into helping countries such as Indonesia preserving some of the forest resources that they still have. So When I'm saying that policies are bad, it's not meant as a blame game. It's just meant as a fact, and we need to move together and find ways of improving that.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions. I am scrolling through. One more from Emily Fripp. If EU demand is halved, but global demand continues to grow, then EU political influence on producers for sustainable palm oil will decline. Production won't go down if EU demand goes down, as it will go into other markets. How can we, or probably should we, do we want to maintain some level of influence and demand for sustainable palm oil?
Well, I do think that Indonesia and Malaysia do care for European views because Europe is the biggest export market. And therefore, it's not that Europe is
just in my perspective, India is the biggest buyer of palm oil, right?
I think India is the biggest. Is it okay? I mean, it used to be. You may be right. India is one of the top 3 users of palm oil, but they also produce some palm oil. So I think in terms of imports, you may be right. You may have the more up to date statistics. But
Sorry,
Europe is one of the large importers.
We are a large importer, yeah.
But you're right. I mean, India is not looking for certified palm oil, and that means, in a way, of course, if only the relatively poorer countries that don't yet care about sustainability that much would be importers, then the initiative may not be carried forward. But I don't, I mean, 2 things. First of all, the hope, of course, is that countries that are growing economically also grow in terms of international responsibility and preferences for sustainability. The second thing is Europe will remain a large importer, even if we reduce. So I think the initiatives that Europe can carry forward in terms of sustainability certification are important.
Thanks. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I was just thinking a little bit further. But,
yeah, I think
an interesting question.
Yeah, yeah. I think a related question is: do you expect reduce of palm oil for biofuel in Europe will impact economic incomes of smallholders in the future? Do you expect this, let's say, a price effect from that?
No, I don't. I mean, if that were the only effect, reducing demand, then everything else constant, then prices would go down, and that could also affect smallholders. But of course, the world is not holding everything else constant. So global demand is increasing. So if we are reducing, let's say, our biodiesel, palm oil-based biodiesel, then the overall demand growth worldwide will be somewhat slower than it would be without that policy. Yeah, so it's not. I don't expect rapidly declining palm oil prices simply because the growth in demand that we project for the world is currently stronger than the supply. Supply is also a little bit slow because especially when you're establishing new plantations, it takes a few years. That can lead to undersupply. It can also lead to oversupply when you're not, taking care of what may happen in a few years. But I don't necessarily think that, stopping to use palm oil would be a major factor hurting smallholders in Indonesia or Malaysia.
I think I'm going to go into the final questions because the time is really flying away.
Sorry, I'm talking too much. Yeah.
Well, that's what we invited you for, I guess. Martin, you show that rural communities benefit from oil palm production. But a recent study from Santika and others in 2020 suggests that communities, particularly with poor market connection, prior to palm oil did not really benefit from palm oil, but rather the poverty increased. Could you elaborate a little bit why you expect these results differ?
Well, the results obviously differ from the perspective of what is there. I mean, when you go into Sumatra, where markets are relatively well developed and markets for selling oil palm, but also, for instance, markets for buying food. I mean, if you're not producing food yourself, you have to get it from the market. If markets are not working and infrastructure is not there, I mean, if you go to remote places on Borneo, for instance, where you don't have proper infrastructure and only farming that people did previously was subsistence-oriented farming, and in this situation, you introduce oil palm either in the form of big plantations. Or even if smallholders are involved to some extent, but if the markets are not functioning, then of course they couldn't benefit. So the sense is it's more poverty reducing if smallholder farmers are directly involved in production, but this can obviously only work well if they're connected to markets for inputs, for the output, and also for other things that they need. And of course, I'm not surprised to see in particular situation where this market access is not, perhaps temporarily or not yet functioning properly, that farmers or local communities in that respect don't benefit.
Mm-hmm. Oh dear, I'm not. How do I start wrapping this up? Final one, how does oil palm fare in terms of carbon sequestration versus other crops and versus rainforests?
Well, in terms of rainforest, I had those numbers that, on average, a hectare of rainforest has about 200 tons of carbon sequestered in terms of biomass, and oil palm about 40. So about 5 times less than rainforest. I think that should answer the question.
Yeah, I think it was already answered by you. Yeah, I'm thinking we have a lot more open questions, but it's time to start wrapping up.
I mean, one of the things, if really somebody has an urgent question, I'm also happy if they approach me via email, and perhaps then I can answer their question via email, just in case there is something. But I would certainly like to also point you to the article that's linked to the blog, and because that's an open access article and it has a lot of information that may be of interest.
Yeah, it's good that you mention it because it has a lot of information. I was impressed when I read it for the first time, and this morning I read it again to prepare, and I thought there's such a wealth of information. My support team tells me we will add your email to the final slide, so people can see it there. My question to the support team is, can we show the result of the first poll? Is that possible? Do you think palm oil banning would improve the sustainability of food and food consumption in Europe? And here it says no, 71%, unsure, 27%, and yes, 1%. Okay, that's a clear answer. We also have a final poll question that will come up now. has this webinar changed your mind about palm oil? So I'll give you the final minutes of this webinar to think about that. In the meantime, Martin, I would like to give the floor for you for some final reflections. How do you see the future of palm oil, or are there anything you want to give this audience?
I mean, I would even go beyond palm oil. You know, the future of sustainable food and agricultural systems, and I think, and I'm more and more concerned that the challenges of planetary boundaries at times when we still see poverty and food insecurity can only work if we put together efforts on the one hand, trying to consume more sustainably. And that means that it's less relevant for palm oil, but it means dietary change, also with less animal source products and things like this. And at the same time, don't think that this will solve everything, because we need production increases as well to nourish and feed the growing populations. And that will mean we need to look for ways of increasing production without, you know, hurting the environment. And that leads us to new sustainable types of technologies. Both consumption and production need to become more sustainable. And that holds true for palm oil as well as for other areas of the food and agricultural system.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very aligned with, I think, my personal thinking also, and also the Solidaridad thinking. We need to navigate sustainable production and consumption in all crops, and reduce meat intake. So thank you. These are good closing words. I always feel a little bit like strange when ending a webinar like this, because I don't see the audience. So it's a weird end, but herewith I would like to thank you so much, Martin, for your questions. Supporting, maybe we can see the final slide. So more information and an announcement for the next webinar that will be in January will be shared through our LinkedIn channels and through our website. Here you see also the mail address of Martin. So thanks so much for Martin for being available. I won't make an effort to forward the questions that are still open, but I hope that people whose questions weren't answered can forward it to you. And I've learned a lot from you. Thank you so much for joining you. And for everybody, thanks for joining us, and I hope it was insightful, and I look forward to welcoming you all in the webinar in January in 2021, and we'll keep you posted. Well, maybe final thing, can we see the results of the last poll? So yes, 46% has changed its mind. Well, that's nearly 50%, so that's an amazing result, I think. And for now, I wish you all a good rest of the day, and thanks again to Martin.